Greetings, my dear friends. It's an immense pleasure to be with you again this Monday for the fourth part of our teaching, Antidote to Chaos, a blueprint to abundant life, a blueprint to a good life, or a pathway to a good life. Okay, let me begin by giving a word of encouragement. But I believe I have a feeling that there might be one or two of you that need to hear this word today, or not just for today, but any other day of your life. My work puts me in a position where a lot of young adults get to confide in me and pour out their hearts to me and tell me the challenges they are facing, the emotional difficulties and the psychological difficulties and the spiritual difficulties they are having. They tell me things that they will not tell anyone, and they themselves are even ashamed to admit those things about themselves. I think it's a great honor to be in such a position. But anyway, what I want to tell you is that we are about to the end, few weeks to the end of 2020 according to the Gregorian calendar. And one thing that I've heard so often from a lot of young adults lately is that a lot of them are under a lot of stress. Quite a good number of them are under a lot of stress. Some are depressed, and some don't feel like their life is meaningful or purposeful. They feel themselves like a waste in the sense that uh, they're just occupying space in life. They are not offering any real value to anyone else. And that boils down to what a lot of them say, that they feel like they are failures. They are often, hey, Dr. Bonfleet, I really do feel like I'm a failure. And when I ask, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? And we have this conversation where I ask them questions that lead them to the root of that feeling, of that thought. And one, I found out at least three things that are common among most of them. One is that often they are either consciously or unconsciously measuring themselves against someone else. In other words, they are comparing themselves with others. Some do this consciously, some do it unconsciously. They are not aware that that is what is going on. Secondly, others is because someone else, an authority figure, or someone else that is important in their lives, someone that they have a need to impress or to show, prove themselves to that person. It's comparing them and challenging them and measuring them against someone else who, in their estimation, is more successful. Why can't you be like that person? And why can't you be like so and so? And look at what so and so have done with their lives. What are you doing with your own life? And so on. And thirdly, this is not so common among most of them, but it's one of the things that at least two or three you find, is that they are measuring themselves against a value standard of evaluation that the culture for the most part of the culture today for the most part upholds and projects and beams this standard of evaluation through celebrities and so-called influencers on the media, be it social media, television, and the movies and every other avenue of influence, media avenue of influence. So some of them have bought into that system of value evaluation of evaluating people and measuring people's worth. And because they've bought into that system and they rank themselves and they see that they rank very low according to that system of evaluation, and as a result, they feel that they are failures. Okay, so what I want to tell you, if you're one of such people that is feeling like this for one reason or the other, and usually this is how, when we begin the conversation, this is how it starts. They can point me to something in their life that is not going well. It could say that uh, my career is not doing so fine, or maybe they are not doing fine relationship wise, or maybe two or three areas that are not so well, and they could point to them and say, "This is why I feel like I'm a failure." But those of you who've been listening to me, you know how I think. I would ask that, but it is not self-evident that when you have problems in such areas, or if things are not fine in this area, in that area, it makes you a failure. Who says that you're a failure because you have this problem with your career, or you have not achieved this level of your career? Who says that? But all the same, I'll give you the same advice, the same encouragement that I've given most of them in our private conversations, is that, especially for those who are consciously or unconsciously measuring themselves with others, there's a scripture, there's a verse that says that to compare yourself with others is not wise, that those who compare themselves with others are not wise. From a moral perspective, you could say that since we are individual creations of God, God who created us as individuals, unique individuals, and each of us have unique and idiosyncratic desires and goals and values, things we want for our lives, things that are important for us. To compare yourself with others as a unique creature of God, it's a moral affront to God who created you. In other words, what you should be looking at is that, can I be the best that I can be to my creator who created me, the design? What did he design me for? And what is my purpose? What is my place in life? Can I take that place and be the best that I can possibly be and be content with it? Or, secondly, that is one way in which comparing yourself with others could be not good. The second part is that no one really knows what goes on in other people's lives. You don't know. And in life, human beings are not one dimensional creatures. You're not a one dimensional being, that because you cannot afford food today, or because you cannot afford your bills this month, or because you cannot afford something, or something in your life is not going well, that in itself makes you a failure. You have so many other areas and dimensions to your life. Some of them are doing well, some of them are not, like most people, the most human beings. Hardly do you find someone that doesn't have at least one area in their lives where they are having struggles with, or something to contend with and fix. So when you comparing yourself with others, and let me give you an example. Now, if you remember giving this example to someone, and this was very particular to their case, that imagine you comparing yourself with your colleague at work, because he is always getting all the promotions, he's getting the increase of salary, he's just bought a new car, he has two cars, he's built his house, and he has kids, and he seems well and fine, and you're envious of his promotions and his career success. But that same person, his wife, is having an affair, and that has been a source of tremendous pain in his life. And when he leaves work, he dreads going home because of the chaos he has to go meet at home. But you get to leave work and go home to a grateful and a loving wife and a happy home with kids that love you and live in a peaceful environment, and the kids that are well nurtured spiritually and physically. Now, you he cannot look at you, that colleague of yours cannot look at you and say you are not successful because you don't have the financial and career success they are having. And neither can you look at yourself and say you're a failure because you're not having that. There are aspects of your lives, the game we call life. Each individual is playing so many games at the same time. and they are losing at some, and they are winning pretty well at others. And just like every other individual, and you do not know the full extent of the game that others are losing in their lives and those that they are winning. You probably see all of the games that they are winning, but you don't see the ones that they are losing. I remember a young lady, so a couple of years ago. She dresses, I mean, with the top fashion expensive dresses you could think of, and she's wealthy, successful career wise, very brilliant and intelligent, graduated top of her class, got a good job. And to her, if you don't know, is one of those people to envy. God has buttered their bread, everything is well and going on perfectly fine in their lives. I remember sitting across the table with this young woman in my office, and she's telling me that, look, doc, I feel so depressed. I feel like taking my own life sometimes. Now, this is something no one else knows. From everyone else, everyone wants to be like her. Of course, I understand how it is that people that seem to have everything put together can be going through hell and you don't know. And that is why it is not smart to compare yourself with others. A lot of those who you think are successful are not as successful as you think. They have their own struggles, and some of them you will not want to exchange your own troubles for theirs. And so she told me all the list of health problems that she has. And I mean, I've, I've met very few people who had so much health problems in the same body. In one human being had all those so many health problems. And And so all these health problems, and as if that was not enough, you could look at her relationships, the way she talks about her relationships on social media, the way she posts pictures of herself and her spouse, and the things she says about her marriage, but you did not know. And then she tells me the hell they're going through in their marriage, in her relationship are in tatters, her relationship with her siblings too is and her family, it's in a big chaos. But this is someone that, from the look of it, if you don't know, she looks like she has everything you would want in life: a loving husband, a wonderful marriage, a good job, she's pretty, she's intelligent, and all that. You see, so that is why it is not smart to compare yourself with others, because you do not really know anyone. You don't know the games that are going on in their lives, those that they are winning and those that they are losing. And some of you will not want to exchange your problems for the ones of others that in your mind you envy their lives. And also, you don't want to become a slave to the system of evaluation, to the hierarchy of values that is being beamed by the culture. For instance, who decided who decided that a career was more important, and this one is for ladies, that a career was more important than having a family, having kids, and raising them and caring for your family? Who made that decision? Who said that? Because one of the things I with a lot of young ladies who fall in this category of people feeling depressed and not feeling content with their lives, some of the young ladies, their problem is because they are not having the career they feel like they could have, but they have a loving husband, they have a good home, and the problem they feel that way is because of the condescending attitude of some of their friends who call themselves iron ladies, who have immersed themselves in a career world, especially a competitive career world, where they compete with men and they're in the top of their game. And so they have these friends in their circle, and their friends get to look at them condescendingly and as people who wasted their lives caring for a man or caring for children instead of doing something to impact in the world. And these are real conversations. I'm not just making this up. These are real conversations I have with people. And what some of them don't know is that some of those their very friends that have seem on top of their game dread also some of them too I've talked with and they've talked with me, and they wish they had the lives of these other ladies that in public they look at and even speak condescendingly towards. I'm saying that the world, there's a lot of dishonesty in the world. There's a lot of lies in the world. People act out like everything is okay. They don't tell you that people might, to defend their choices, might act in public like they don't regret those choices, or they don't think they would have made them a different way, and maybe balanced it up differently. And in public, on social media, they say different things about those choices, but in their private life, and when they meet someone like me, what they say about those choices is not what you hear them say. So I'm saying that be smart, be wise, okay? And that is why I am teaching you God's values, God's hierarchy of values. And if you're going to have a hierarchy of values, you don't want that of another human being, do you? Who is another human being to tell you what should be important in your life, what should be valuable, what should define you and make you successful? At least if someone is going to tell you that, it should be God, right? I made a statement in the previous teaching that you're not your own master, neither are you your own slave. And I said some statements that I think about them and I really understand the implications. I know that those are very powerful statements. And there's some of you that still struggle with that idea. And by the way, this is the point where I get to thank all of you who got back to me with feedback. Those of you who shared the teaching. Last night, just before I went to bed, I checked the download numbers, and then I'm doing this teaching on a Monday. For those who are listening, the recording, I'm doing it today, Monday. Was the date of today? Today, Monday. It's my calendar. Today, Monday, the 14th of December. And last night, before I went to sleep, I checked the download numbers, and we're about 9 downloads short of the numbers, the extraordinary numbers we had for blueprints to redemption and transcendence. And we are just on the third part of the teaching, but the numbers are just about 9 points shy of the total numbers we had for blueprints to redemption and transcendence. You know what that tells me? You're doing a great job sharing the teaching. And you know what that also tells me? More and more people are finding value in this. It's good for everyone. It's win-win for everyone, isn't it? I want to thank all of you who endeavor to share it with your friends and with those that you think would find value in it. Keep doing it. You're doing something good, and we are in this together. Okay, and thank those of you who gave me feedback. Those of you who contacted me with expressing your gratitude for the things you learned, and also some of you gave material and financial tokens as a way of expressing your gratitude. God bless you. You all mean so much to me, and thank you so much. Okay. All right. So what was I? So I said that you're not your own master, you're not your own slave. And some of you are struggling with that idea. I had the conversation with some of you, and some of you like to think that you're in control and totally in control of yourself, and you're so self-aware. What I would say is that, and like I told one of you, that you fall in love with someone that from get-go, you know that that person is not good for you, and you know so much that that relationship is not healthy, but you fall in love with that person anyway. You find yourself emotionally addicted, or turned on by that person. Uh, so you are you so much in control there. Now you can control what you do with that feeling. You can control. You can decide to act on it or not to act on it. But you are. In other words, you have a nature. There are all these forces within us that to understand. And I think the more I think about it, and the more I think about how some of you struggle with that, and what it means for your life, because that too is another whole subject to explore. I'm thinking that in future I might have to do a whole teaching series on this. We might call it self mastery. But first of all, we must talk about what self mastery means, and to the extent that it's possible for you to truly be a master of your own fate and destiny. And I think that that extent is only possible. It's like this, for example, you're a boat that is being pushed on this ocean by winds, by strong winds. You're not the wind. You don't have control of the wind or the direction the wind goes. You don't have control of the ocean, of the waves, and all those things. But what you have is you can build a boat that is strong enough to withstand waves, strong waves, and you can build a boat that can navigate and take advantage of the wind and navigate and go to where you want to go to. In other words, the extent to which you can be a master of your own life is to understand the rules and the permanent principles that govern life. Because you are not a master uh, in the sense that you can skirt these rules, trample the rules, and do as you wish and end up where you want to end. It will not work. There are consequences you will not be able to avoid because you're not a master in that sense. If you trample upon the rules, the permanent principles of life. For instance, you can say you're a master of your own life and you climb on a 5 floor story building and you dive head on to the ground. You're gonna die. You're gonna be die or you're gonna be terribly injured that whatever will be left of you will not be anything to be proud of. And you're not a master in that sense. There are rules. So the extent to which you can be a master, you can be in control, is to the extent that you understand how the world works and you walk within the rules. You follow the rules. You take advantage of the rules and so on. Okay, okay. That said, last week we ended at a point where I was about to give you the spiritual rules, one spiritual principle, because we talked about a physical permanent principle. I used one example, the Archimedes rule, to explain to you. I used that as a case study to explain to you how permanent principles work. And how do you know something is a permanent principle, and how do you know the value of a permanent principle, like we did with the Archimedes principle, the rule of flotation, the principle of flotation. uh, that one principle explains a wide spectrum of different phenomena. It solves problems and answers questions and solves paradoxes in a wide spectrum of phenomena. Okay, so how do you know something is a permanent principle, or something is a universal principle, or something is a timeless eternal principle? And spiritual principles, most especially the principles of scripture, are timeless, and are universal. Means it applies to everyone, everywhere, at every time in history. Now, so there are literally very little limitations to permanent spiritual principles. Unlike physical principles, there are some physical principles, like for example, the Newtonian principle of gravity. It only applies within a certain context. Outside that, is no longer true. It's false. Now we have to use different principles, higher laws of relativity, and so on. It's the same now, but with spiritual principles don't really work like that. It's usually universal and timeless. And so sometimes, and this is one thing that I find to be just as dangerous as ignorance. There are people who try to simplify the world and believe that they have simple slogans and pithy statements, pithy simple statements and anecdotes and apodictic quotes that in it is the answer to human problems. I think it's just as that kind of attitude is just as dangerous as ignorance, because the world is simple only when the world behaves. What do I mean by that? Like I said, how to run a car, how to manage your car, how to use your cell phone is simple when the car behaves. It's just as simple as turn on the ignition and push the gears and press on the accelerator. It's just as simple as that, and then you control the steering. It's just as simple as that when the car behaves. But when the car develops problems, now the simple principles like that don't work anymore. The world is simple when the world behaves. So and sometimes I find this to just be as dangerous as ignorance. People who have lived shielded lives, in a sense, or they have not lived shielded lives, but they have shielded their minds from the realities of their situations. Because I found people who have experienced things that should have made them wise, but they're just as blunt and clueless, like people who have had no experience. In other words, that you could imagine someone that has never been poor, have never known what it meant to be born in a poor family that was not just poor materially, but they were poor in their mentality and in everything. And someone can just stand from the high horse. Poor people are lazy, or they just need to be motivated. All these simple catch solutions. Somebody just believes that he has found the answer to poverty and just comes on Facebook and posts one pithy statement on what he believes should everyone should understand, and when they understand it, they act and their problems will be solved. And that too is just as dangerous as ignorance, because human beings are complicated. Life is complicated, especially when things are not working, especially when there is chaos. Simple, pithy answers do not work. Slogan solutions do not work. I gave you an example before about the absence makes the heart grows fonder. Out of mind is out of sight. We talked about that, right? Okay, my point here is that most of the times you would find principles that sound really wonderful. You might hear these principles about relationships, about money, about career, about sex, about everything else, and these are being beamed out by authorities. One thing you find about some of these principles is that it applies to one person, then doesn't apply to the next person. It applies in some contexts, and in other contexts it doesn't apply. And then there are those who are teaching from their experience rather than from permanent principles, and in other words what they did to succeed, and then they teach these things as though they are permanent principles, and then people foolishly try to apply that to their own lives, forgetting that that person is unique. Their skills, their talents, their resilience, their spiritual resources and physical resources are not the same like yours, and their circumstances are not the same like yours. It might look the same, but they are not. And there's so many factors that are not the same, and then you try to apply their method on your own life, and then you get into all kinds of trouble. So, but a permanent principle like what we did with the Archimedes rule will most likely apply across a very wide spectrum. The exceptions will be very little or none. Okay, so you should test this, that when you hear something that sounds smart, try to think of many other applications, contexts in which that thing can apply. And the more it fails to stand in different situations, like we did with the Archimedes principle, then you know that that is not a permanent principle. It might be a principle that works in the context, that for people who are like that person to a great extent, that principle might work for them, but won't work for others. There's a joke that I always say, that I always make with someone. I think I always make this joke with Clarice. And sometimes we talk about something and I say, does it work? I say, no, it works just like the principle of get rich by tithing. It works for some and then doesn't work for some. And then we have to find all these reasons why it's not working for some. And it doesn't work for the majority, it works for the minority. As a matter of fact, if there are 100 people in the church who buy onto that idea that will just come and tithe and do this and do this, and suddenly, bam, we are millionaires. A few people who do it will be millionaires, and the correlation itself is even suspect. Because correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. Just because you gave 100,000 as offerings or tithes today, and then the next day they call you for a job opportunity, doesn't necessarily mean cause and effect. And then the next person hears it and he comes and empties bank account and gives, and next day they don't get called for a job. These are not permanent principles. Or at least the way it is applied, that is not how a permanent principle or spiritual permanent principles of finance work. Okay, so I was going to tell you about one spiritual permanent principle as a matter of example, and uh, let's take this one, the permanent principle that men and women are different, that the gender, men and women are very different in many different ways. Now, are men and women different biologically speaking? Of course they are. But this is not the sense that I want to talk about. I want to talk about spiritual differences between male and female, between men and women. And I could break this down. I could break down the axiom between the difference between men and women into 12 separate permanent principles, like 12 ways in which men and women are different, and it's from one another, and it's very important. But it doesn't matter. Here we have got a permanent principle that is spiritual, that men and women are different from each other in many ways, not just biologically, but spiritually. And remember that how I use the word spiritually in my teachings. 90% of the time, all the time, unless when I say so, when I use the word spiritual, I use it in the sense I've described in Blueprints to Redemption, in the sense I've described, I think, in this lecture, and I might get to describe it again. In that something that is not scientific, that cannot be measured with standard scientific instruments, standard physical instruments, that cannot be measured in a lab, and also something that requires uniquely a human being to relate with. For instance, animals do not do commerce. Animals do not do commerce. They don't trade. They don't buy and they don't sell. They don't be economists. They don't get married. They don't eat like us. So there are a lot of things. So all these things either are in the mid spectrum between spiritual and physical, or they are mostly spiritual. Like marriage is spiritual. Marriage is not a physical thing. And so the principles that govern marriage are spiritual principles, not physical principles, not materialistic principles. They are spiritual, permanent principles that govern stuff like marriage. And so when I use the word spiritual in my teachings, unless otherwise I say so, it is in that sense that I mean spiritual. So here we have a spiritual principle, and that men and women are not just different biologically speaking. Of course, men and women are different biologically, but does these biological differences mean that a woman cannot work at a bricklaying chantier? Chantier is a French word. I don't. Is that an English? That word also English. Or cannot work. Use the hammer, for example, to break concrete, to build a house, to paint a house. Of course, a woman can do that. She can. And does it also mean that the biological differences between male and female, a man cannot babysit a baby, or take care of kids and change the diapers and so on? Of course not. A man is capable of babysitting. So the physical and biological differences between men and women are simple to understand. They are what they are. But the real profound differences are the differences that are spiritual. And so, for instance, let me give you an example of one of those very real spiritual difference between male and female, or men and women. There was a question that Jacob's son Judah asked his daughter-in-law Tamar, whom he didn't recognize as his daughter-in-law. You know the story, right? In Genesis chapter 38, you can start reading from Genesis 38. And so Judah didn't recognize Tamar, that she was his daughter-in-law, and he met her on the roadside, and she was sitting by the roadside. And in Genesis 38, in verse 16, Judah says to Tamar, of course, that he didn't recognize who she was, She taught her to be the woman she was, the kind of woman she was posing to be. And Judah said to her, "Can I come into you?" Now you know what that means. Very literal, very specific, and very graphic. Then Tamar responded, "What are you going to give me?" Because of course Tamar was posing like that sort of woman, and so she asked him, "What are you going to give me?" And the story goes on. Now let's consider that question. Let's just consider that question that Judah asked. Judah asked Tamar, "Can I come into you?" Very straight, very direct, and very specific. Now imagine a perfectly presentable, nice looking guy, presentable, nice looking, well dressed, walks into say, a school campus or a place where there are a lot of young women, and he goes to, say, 100 young women at random, and he poses that question to them, just as direct and straight and simple as that. Uh, in of course, in a more modern colloquial term, in how we use the term today. I don't know what young guys would say, how they say it nowadays, but if you know, just imagine it. I don't think I can bring myself to say it here. But imagine a presentable, nice looking young guy goes to 100 women at random in the campus, young women in the campus, and tells them, "Hey, can I come into you?" Or however would be said in today's parlance that suits that kind of situation. And now imagine what will happen. Now, a lot of you can tell what is going to happen. Most, unless some of those young women that have bought into the progressive modern culture that men and women are equal, that men and women can have casual sex and non-committed sex just like men, and all that thing that the culture has brainwashed young women, who most of them when they get to regret it later after they realize that they were fighting against their nature. You're not your own master, you're not your own slave. There are consequences when you break spiritual rules, and the consequences are real, very real, and some of them could be not unreversible. Most of these young women will tell this young man, "Are you crazy? What kind of woman do you think I am? Or who do you think I am? Do you think I am a prostitute or that kind of woman?" So that's what most young women will say. Their reaction would be disdain and almost a knee jerk rejection of disapproval and disdain. Now, let's do the reversal. Now imagine that it's a perfectly nice looking young woman, well dressed up, pretty, and looking good, walks up to 100 different men and tell them the same thing, uh, to these 100 different men. What do you think most of them, if not all, of the young men will say? And most of them will say, "Yes, of course. How about now? Can we go do it now?" That's what is going to happen. And this is a huge difference between men and women that the high priests and the prophets, the so-called experts and intellectuals and influencers and celebrities are trying to tell you that they are exactly the same. Men can comfortably and easily have non-committed sex. It doesn't mean anything to them, doesn't mean as much. But something has to go fundamentally wrong with a woman, or she has to tell herself a lot of lies. And this is true for most women. Most, there are exceptions, but this is true for most women. Women cannot have non-committed sex like men unless something is really broken with them, and all that, and just throw themselves and just get going with any man and the next and the next and the next. And that is why I'm probably going to say something here that might hurt the sensibilities of some of you if you bought into the modern modern progressive culture, that if you meet a young woman that have been sleeping around serially, do not think, no matter whatever reasons that she gives you for that kind of behavior, do not for a second think, like a young man, that that woman is not broken and damaged in a very significant way. I'm not saying that she cannot become a good wife, or she cannot change, or you cannot have a good marriage with her. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that that kind of behavior in a woman is an indicator of something fundamentally wrong and broken in most cases. For men, one of my teachers always say that a woman looks for one man to meet all her needs, and a man looks for one woman to meet a man looks for many women to meet his one need. In other words, a woman looks for one man to meet her many needs. A man looks for many women to meet his one need. That's it. So these are, now we could go on and on, and this is some things that a lot of young guys make a lot of mistakes with their lives in terms of marriage choices. They meet a young woman that is perfectly okay and comfortable, seems perfectly okay and comfortable, just giving her body, just sharing her body. Something is really wrong. If I were you, I would think very well. There must be something else that is so, she must have other things that are so going well about her for you to want to marry a woman like that. Because do not think for a second that that behavior has not seriously damaged her. Now, this is something very controversial and to say in today's culture. If I were to post something like this on a public platform, people will fall on me like bees and honey, like bees. You're still backward and primitive, and they feel like the culture have progressed. All those primitive ideas about women. There is a reason why when a man is unfaithful in a marriage, the chances of the marriage surviving that is higher than when it is the woman that is unfaithful. There's a reason for that. Now we cannot get into all of that now. Uh, uh, why that is the case. Uh, so back then in secondary school, we had a teacher, a biology teacher, who wrecked a lot of lives. He's dead now. Maybe that's a good thing, because he was a permanent teacher in the school, and every year he has to share his doctrine, his philosophy. And one of the things he, as a biology teacher, made us to think was that sex was more like just going to the store with your girl or boy, and you buy ice cream and have fun and just eat the ice cream. And so to him, sex was just a physical thing, two people just enjoying themselves. There was no other special meaning to it. And people who, to him, he created the environment that made it seem like if you were shy about sex and shy talking about it publicly, directly and specifically, you were backwards and primitive and naive. And you know, when you're among teenagers, among peers, no one wants to come out looking like the backward, primitive kind. And so we had, suddenly after that lecture, there was an explosion, a change of behavior in both the boys and girls in class. I mean, boys will just walk up and or even a girl, can we go, and just as blunt and as straight like that. And if the girl maybe or the boy maybe wants to behave like he doesn't or is not interested, or however, see the people boo the other peers, they laugh at him and make fun of him. uh and we, real thing, I mean, I was part of the class. We had students who would just sit and say, after school, can we go here and do? And the next day they come and they are talking about what they did and how they did. I mean, it was crazy. We It was that crazy. And he also promoted that the idea of being jealous, of having a partner, your own boyfriend or your own girlfriend, where you're the only one who gets to have the sexual intimacy with them, was backwards and primitive. In the modern world, uh, people who are liberated, that kind of possessiveness and jealousy is for backward people. I mean, there was a crazy explosion. Everyone was just sleeping with everyone in that class and in all those classes. I mean, the school itself became notorious for that kind of behavior, for people just sleeping anyhow. It became part of the everyone knew that if you're sending your child to that school, the child is likely to get spoiled because of that kind of behavior where the students behave like that. It was that horrible. I remember there was a young guy, who will not mention his name. I remember his name still very clearly because what happened to him was rather very unfortunate. He was, I think, 22 years old at the time. He was very elderly for the class. Was one of the big guys in the class, and he was still a virgin. He was brought up from a very decent family and parents who feared God and kept traditional values and instilled these values into the children. He had no plan on getting into that kind of behavior unless with his spouse. And because of the new cultural revolution that was happening in our class and in the school, not just in the class, in the school, and because the teacher had so many classes and he taught this philosophy to so many classes, the teacher himself he was a serial, uh, he was serially having that kind of relationship with students and it was such a thing. The whole culture of morality shaming was part of the class. You might think that a lot of these things are happening just in the West. This happened in 2008. Was it 2008 or 6 in my class here in Cameroon? And so morality shaming, that if you said, I'm keeping myself for my husband, oosh, you're that primitive, you're still that naive, you're still that backward. And so that is what was happening in our class. It was morality shaming, that the good guys were now the bad guys. They were the guys we that were laughed at and that were mocked and that were ridiculed, and the bad guys were the ones who were praised. Those who, I mean, we had people doing things that if I mention here, it just it's not even so decent for me to mention in this very teaching. They were doing it in class and with students watching and sharing and excitement. I mean, those kind of things. And so this guy, whom I won't mention his name, uh, when it came to be discovered that he had not had the experience, he every day he was the topic of laughter and mockery, and the peer pressure was so strong he couldn't take it. And there was a young lady that came and offered for them to do that kind of stuff, and he gave into the pressure, not the pressure from the young lady, the pressure from the peers, the class, and he went and did it. And he came the next day in class and he proudly said how he did it, that he did it, and with such pride and such smile. And anyway, so I'm saying that this is the world. This is a hierarchy of values that are being pumped into the world. The idea that men and women are the same, and that sex is exactly the same for men and women, and that it is only physical. Okay, like take for instance that people will claim that robots or sex toys and sex dolls and now the industry is looking forward to making androids, that is artificial intelligence sex dolls that are powered by artificial intelligence, that these dolls would behave like real women and so on. And so there are people who honestly believe that this is going to replace the need for male female relationships. And this is also what I want to get into, that I mentioned to you that if you could understand permanent principle is spiritual principle in the area of male female relationship, in the reality and the difference between good and evil, and in how money works, you are well educated spiritually, you are spiritually educated and well, that is enough for you to have a good life if you understand this, the principles in these three areas, and act them out properly. Now there are many others that are also important, but these three is the necessary, the basic necessary ones. With them you can have a sufficiently good and meaningful life. And so these people will claim that these sex dolls are going to replace human beings, or male female relationships. Men will no longer need women and all that stuff. And by the way, do you know that men are pretty much comfortable admitting that they cannot do without women, that they need women in their lives, and what women do for their lives, and how women make their lives much more better. Men are much more comfortable accepting that than women. Well, there's this saying that I don't think I remember that quote well. That there's a saying, very popular mantra of today, that a woman needs a man as much as a bicycle needs. Let me make mine up, but if you Google it, you would see the full quote. But I don't remember the ending of it. These things don't really stick well in my mind. Maybe it's because they are so dull. Anyway, it could say that a woman needs a man just as much as a bicycle needs fuel, needs petrol. In other words, a woman doesn't need a man at all. And it seems the pride of the world of that movement is about how you can do as a woman without a man. I mean, if you're a woman and you say that you need a man in your life, I mean, you're still that backward and needy. But men are pretty much comfortable doing that. Why is that the case? Anyway, so I was going to say that, what was it I was going to say? Anyway, it seems I've gone round and round and I lost my thought here. That the claim is that just as science is evolving, okay, so let me finish that thought before I lose it again. About that, sex dolls are going to replace uh, male female relationships, or will change the nature of male female relationships. But I could tell you, and remember, you heard it from here first, that in the next 10 years, where AI driven sex dolls will become a reality, it's still not going to change the dynamic of male female relationships. Men are still going to need women, and women are still going to need men. These things cannot replace women, and this is why. Because sexual intercourse is not just physical, it is also spiritual, and 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 what makes it meaningful is not your ability to extract pleasure from the other party as though the other party was an object. It's the ability to give pleasure. And so that brings the fundamental limitation with sex dolls and even masturbation and even AI driven sex dolls. The limitation is the inability to give pleasure to that object. Now they can make the sex dolls, like most of the sex dolls that are being made now, to for them to emulate the to mimic as though they are being pleasured. But you know it's fake, you know it's not real, and so that fundamental limitation of not being able to give pleasure uh, divides reduces the satisfaction of that experience by more than 70%. It is not like that. It's not. Uh, it's not going to replace the meaning and what happens in male, actual, real spiritual beings involving in that kind of activity. Now, so ideas like this, that men and women are the same, or that the nature of women has changed, women have evolved, and so on, and we men, we are still those primitive, masculine people trying to dominate, and there's all this critique at masculinity, yeah, about rape culture and all that. The claim is that just as science is evolving, human beings, the nature of human beings is also evolving, and human nature is changing. And just as we are changing our ideas about our understanding of the world, anyway, let me give you an example. A long time ago, before I even start the example, do you realize that what was happening in my class back then, more than 10 years ago, is the definition of chaos? That is what chaos is. That is what chaos looks like. And you don't want that chaos in your life, and that is why when I'm teaching you the permanent principles of God's permanent spiritual principles of life, and God's hierarchy of values and orders, I'm giving you the antidote to chaos. Because I'm not just telling you that God says this is more valuable than this one should be more important than this one. I'm explaining to you why, the permanent principles behind them. If you have a better antidote to chaos, please let me know, because I pretty much think that this is a good antidote to chaos. It's worked for me. That is how I have been able to overcome so many bad, seductive ideas. That is how I am able to stand, irrespective of how much the direction the masses are going to, how much they mock at me, and I'm able to stand because I have understanding. I don't just have mystical faith or belief that this is right because God says so. I understand why it is right, why it is important. I understand, just like I understand the physical principle of flotation, which we the 30 word physical permanent principle we talked about in the last lecture. Now, a long time ago, the Greeks thought. Now, I want to tell you how physical. This part is where I tell you how physical science changes, and how this. It's the worst thing that should happen to science is that science becomes conservative, that we hold on to old ideas and not allow those ideas to be reformed and improved and revolutionized. The science needs to continually grow and evolve. We need to discover new things and change the way we used to see things. Oh, we're wrong yesterday about what we thought. This is how things are. But the problem is that we think that this knowledge about the physical world, just as the physical world is behaving like this, we think that the spiritual realities of the world are also evolving and changing like this, and that is a gross mistake. That is a costly mistake. Okay, now I want to give you an example of how physical changes. And remember, we are not yet done with the physical permanent principle about male and female, how they are different. We're going to come back to that. There's something very insightful that I want to tell you about there that I think would really blow your mind, and in a good way. A long time ago, the Greeks thought that the difference between different substances like iron and carbon, it's really their most basic element form. That is, the smallest fundamental particle is which was also known as the atom. That is, they believe that the differences between these substances were at the level of their atom. But lots of time went by, hundreds of years, and finally a guy called Dalton. You've heard of Dalton, those of you who studied any basic chemistry or physics. Yeah, and Dalton said that it is not actually like that. That substances are mainly, he said that substances are mainly distinguished by the number of things that are inside them, and that is, he talked about protons and electrons. Now, this is now around the beginning of the 19th century, that specifically in 1808. And Dalton said, no, the Greeks began by thinking that what differentiates, say, iron from carbon, for example, is the atom, the fundamental element, the atom. But Dalton said, no, it is distinguished by the number of things that are inside them. That is the protons and the electrons. And Dalton brought this idea in 1908. And then nearly 100 years goes by. The world lives by the assumption or by the propositions of Darton, and 100 years go by to the end of the 19th century. A man called Thomson, and by the way, these are all English professors, Englishmen professors, and Darton was a well, I mean, sorry, Thomson was a professor at Cambridge, and so in 1898, or thereabout, about 1898, that's 100 years after Dalton said his idea in 1808. And so about that 1898, 100 years go by until Thomson comes up and says, no, it is not quite like Dalton describes it. It is like he explains that it is the atom, or whatever is inside an element. It's like a central heavy nucleus, and then there are electrons flying around or outside the central heavy core, and that is where we get our familiar logo, the most famous logo of an atom today, which you can now find them everywhere, where with electrons that are flying around the orbit of a central core. And Thomson was the first person to introduce that model of how we look at atoms. He was the how we look at elements like that. And however, which most of them still don't hold up about what we've now come to know over years of experiments and so on. Now, came about 20 years later, came another guy. This was in the early 20th century, known as Rutherford. Rutherford, which was also an Englishman, came up with the Rutherford model, and this is pretty close to where we are today in terms of our understanding of matter. And all this happened before World War One. Rutherford said that it is said that it is that there are orbits, but there are levels of orbits. That levels of orbits, and that some electrons are higher or lower in energy than others. And in 1913, things finally get locked up into shape by Danish physicist known as Niels Bohr. And, probably most of you know him. I was one of my best guys back then when I was studying chemistry. And Niels Bohr, uh, his ideas led to the formation of the field that became as his ideas formed the basis of quantum mechanics, from which the understanding which led to the nuclear bomb that was used to level Nagasaki, and then days after, before that, Hiroshima, that was in 1945. Now, that brought to the end. We know that it was the bomb that was dropped on Japan that brought the World War to an end. Now, let me share with you an interesting piece of information that you might find interesting or not about the bomb. The Americans were about to invade Japan, and the Japanese had actually decided to that in fending off the invasion, they were going to make it a suicide mission, and they were going to mobilize 100 million Japanese civilians to get to the beaches where the Americans were going to land, and it was going to be a bloody thing. I mean, body after body. 100 million people is no joke. If you've ever seen 10,000 people gathered, you would think it's the entire planet that have come together. I mean, just 10,000 people. Then, if you say 100,000 people, it is just people everywhere. I mean, just 100,000 people. Then, if you see 1 million people gathered, you will think that is the whole planet that have come together. So 100 million people is no joke. The name of the campaign, the Japanese, they call this campaign the glorious death of 100 million people. And so the bomb that came, actually stopped all that, and that saved a lot of lives, both on the American side and on the Japanese side. Of course, the bomb killed a lot of people too. So, uh, so, so all the atom bomb came as a result of the progressive work of Dalton, Thomson, Rutherford, and Niels Bohr. It could take, say, about 1,000 years or more, and 100 years actually, when the people started seriously looking at it, for that development and understanding to evolve, and that's how long it took. So I tell you that only in order to tell you this, that when it comes to science, you have to be skeptical, you have to be willing to challenge and question and things that are told to you, things that experts tell you. Science is not the thing that you want to be looking to the past for old principles. Yes, you want to build on the foundation of the old principles, but you want to know that they can change, and rightly so. Is not uh, that scientific principles are not true, because if scientific principles are always changing and new ideas are always coming, that makes us see things clearer and better and discard of old ideas. That can make people say scientific ideas are not always true, but that's not the sense. Scientific ideas are not just true, are not uh, scientific principles are true. Let me put it this way: scientific principles are true. Take for something like I mentioned already. It's something like Isaac Newton's equations of motions. His principles and laws of motions are true laws of gravitation, just like Niels Bohr model of reality. But it is not all there is to know. There is more to know, which gives a clearer picture. You see, you got to know Newton, you got to know Einstein, put them together to really understand and more and have a clearer picture. So the worst position anyone can take when it comes to science, when it comes to such subjects, is to think that what I know is all there is to know. That's a very unscientific behavior. It is foolish when it comes to the scientific world to speak with so much certainty, with so much. Scientists don't say this is the truth and nothing but the truth. They say something that like this: with the evidence that we have, the evidence we have already, and our understanding of that evidence points us that this is the conclusion that we draw from the evidence that we have and our understanding of that evidence. You see, uh, so this is the scientific approach. So it's known as a scientific method, even though the progressive culture is also questioning the scientific method. The belief of that truth is relative, also that there are no permanent truths, there are no permanent principles, both in science and both. They started by attacking religion. The religious principles are not true. We've progressed. We've gone past all those primitive Ten Commandments, all those primitive rules of Scripture, and then now also that too is that scientific truths are relative. They are not permanent principles. Try building an aircraft without following permanent principles. Try building an aircraft with progressive principles. You people will die. Nothing will work. You see. So a truly scientific mind is marked by its skepticism, the ability to question things, its openness to new ideas that someone else might know, something I don't know, and that can be very useful in giving more light to my understanding. So people in science question things. Those who question things are the heroes. But in today's atmosphere that also science has been corrupted, almost every field of knowledge is being corrupted. If you question anything in science, you are a denier, you are called a denier. And is the equivalent. So science has become a religion, yeah, and you're the equivalent of a heretic if you question things, and if you challenge things, you're the equivalent of a heretic, and that's what science has become in today's world. Now you cannot leave your now this is I told you that to tell you that to be truly scientific minded, in other words, have a great mind in terms of how to relate with the physical world. If you want to be a good doctor, that will actually good engineer, a good scientist, or whatever in terms of physical disciplines that will actually push the boundaries and create medicine, cures, and create things that are worthwhile. You have to be someone that is willing to challenge the current norms and assumptions of how the world works. But you cannot live your life questioning everything. You cannot live your life questioning and having to start all over again. Are male female relationships are still relevant? Is male and female the same? All that. The world is changing so fast that everyday things are changing, and the truth is that if you are going to go with every wind of change, You'll be unstable. The Apostle Paul says you'll be unstable in all your ways. What you need is that you need to anchor yourself on things that never change. You have to find permanent principles that never change and anchor yourself on. Then you are ready to embrace the things that are constantly changing and use them in a way that will bring meaning and profit to your life. But if you are always changing, always flip flopping, always moving by every wind of doctrine, every wind of philosophy, you will be unstable in all your ways. You will not find your core. You will not know who you are. Now, let me conclude by something, because next week we are going to talk about, I'm going to share with you a permanent principle that applies to money, that applies to male-female relationship, and I'm going to share with you one permanent principle that works in those area. I mean, you're going to be blown by it. It is going to be really, really amazing. But let me conclude today, which we are already out of time by at least 10 minutes. Let me conclude by telling you something. I want to add, comment on something I said. I want to conclude by commenting on something I mentioned in passing in the previous episode. It was from the movie Aladdin, and where the genie, of course, uh, don't think I'm not aware of the origin of that story, which goes thousands and thousands of years. And by the way, the genie was not a benevolent spirit that wants to give you good wishes. It was a demon in ancient cultures. There's a lot that has happened that the story has been changing and changing like that. So believe me, I'm aware of the dark past of that story. But that doesn't mean I cannot use the ideas of that movie to as a parable to explain a principle here for your benefit. And I mentioned that it is interesting that the genie asks does tell you for three wishes. And the question, if I asked you, imagine that I had the power to give you everything you want, every and anything you want, and I ask you that you have the opportunity to sign your check, to write, to fill your check. This is a blank check. Fill in what you want. Three wishes only. The moment I ask you that question, if you're a serious person, you realize that I have just put you in a position where you need to have a hierarchy of values. You need to choose three things that are not only the most important things that you need, but that three things that would also be sufficient enough to to cover up for everything else that you need. In other words, three things that can be a substitute for everything else that you need in life. Can you think of any such three things? I told you that. It's interesting that the story asks, the genie asks you for just three things. You know, most of us think that we know what we want in life, and it's this kind of a illusionary self-confidence that a lot of us tend to have sometimes, that I know what I want out of life. And the irony also goes in terms of our relationships, human interpersonal relationships. One thing I've always said whenever I'm giving relationship advice or relationship counseling: communicate, communicate, communicate. That's all what relationships are about. Communicate. Your relationship is as healthy as your communications are. You don't assume things. You don't look at someone's behavior and assume that you know why they are acting like that. That is, by the way, what is known as being judgmental, judging. If someone behaves to you funny, don't assume malice. Don't let me put it this way: don't pass good judgments, as well as don't make bad judgments. And a judgment is that you assume to know what is going on in someone else's mind, in someone else's heart. You look at someone's actions and maybe the consequences of those actions, then you think that you know their intentions, you know their motives, you know what is in their heart and what is in their minds. You don't know that. You cannot know that. You don't even know your own motives and your own. Believe me, you yourself don't even know your own motives, why you do certain things so well. You might think you know. You might have ideas on your head that you think that is why you're doing those things. But like I've told you, we human beings, we are prone to self-deception. And until you learn to all these booby traps that are riddled with our humanity, and learn how to dodge them well, you'll be falling prey to one or two self deceptions and fallacies. Okay, so this is what I'm saying, that even you yourself don't know your own motives. You don't know your own motives so well. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you think you do, but you really don't. And then sometimes you have ideas why you're acting a certain way, but there are more powerful forces in our subconscious that are really controlling our actions. But the one we tell ourselves is just the excuse that we need to act the way we've already predetermined subconsciously to act. And my point here is this, that in a relationship, to be judgmental, to be a judgmental person, which by the way is toxic. If you're one of those people who do that, stop it already. It's very toxic. Don't always assume that you know why someone behaves the way they behave. If your partner or whoever it is that does something that is off-putting or so, ask them why. What does this mean? What is your purpose for this behavior? And then tell them how it makes you feel, or what it means to you. And that's as healthy as you can go. You don't just look at someone's actions and say, oh, I know what they mean, I know what it means. So that's being judgmental. So that's number one. Number two, so number one, stop being judgmental. Don't be judgmental. Always talk, always communicate, ask questions, don't assume malice. Also, don't assume a virtue. Don't pass good judgments. Don't look at someone the way they act and say, "Oh, that's a good person." That's passing good judgment. And you don't know anything about the person or whatever is going in the person's heart. See, so don't make good judgments. Don't make bad judgments. Ask questions. Ask, and 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 judge the fruits, the way someone is behaving and how it is affecting, regardless of their intentions. Someone does something that is not nice to you, they might have meant well or not, doesn't matter, but always that it's hurting you, it's affecting you negatively. So ask them and tell them how it is affecting you, and regardless of what their motives are, they could stop, not because of their motives, but because of, they could stop regardless of whether their motives are good or bad. They should stop because of how it is affecting you, the consequences. That's number one. Number two is, I always say it like this: ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open. Always communicate what you need and what you don't like. Always communicate as clearly and articulately as possible. You could tell yourself that, well, if someone loves me, they will know what I need. They will know that they should not behave like this, and so on. Nobody has a pipeline to your needs and to your emotions. Not even you. You don't really know what you need at every time and what you want at every time. So communicate. Don't assume your partner should know. Don't assume that they should know. You've probably watched a lot of movies and read a lot of romantic novels where people just read people's minds in the novels and surprise people with the wonderful things they like. Communicate. Uh, and say what you need, say what you want, and say what you don't want. Now, I say this to say that in life, how it is that we come to the point where we actually know what we want in life or what we are supposed to want, because vis-a-vis our position with God, our Creator, we are like babies, we are like infants, we are like toddlers. And a toddler thinks they know what is good for them. They think they know what they want. And it's you and I that look at the toddler, and you know that the toddler doesn't really want that. You know what they really want, but they are holding on to something like they desperately want it. Vis-a-vis God. And if you come to understand the fabric of nature, scientifically speaking and spiritually speaking, if you get to understand the human physiology, everything in terms of neuroscience, how the mind works, to the extent we are able to understand it so far, and all these things, if you get to understand all this, you will realize that the statement I've just made, that vis-a-vis God, we don't know what we want. We don't know what we should want. We don't even know what is good for us and what is not good for us. And that is why what I'm teaching you, I believe, is so necessary, is so important, because God has told us what we should want, what we should need, because you don't know what you need. And maybe you would live your life thinking you really know what you need and what is important for you. Uh, 50, 60, 70 years, and maybe when you're about to die, you're going to have that sudden moment of clarity. And for the very first time, you're going to see so clearly what you really wanted out of life. And you lived your life chasing vanity, chasing smoke, without really expressing the true needs of your the desires of your heart. With the scripture that says that trust in the Lord with all your heart, or trust in the Lord, or how does it say it? Or however it says it, but there's this part that says that, and He shall grant you the desires of your heart. That verse could also be interpreted, rightly so, to say that he he's not just giving you the 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 objects of what your heart desires. Say your heart desires something, He gives it to you. It could be interpreted, and maybe more probably so, that it is saying that the very things that you'll be desiring in your heart are desires He put there. There's also a verse that says that when you embrace, it says, "Come to me and eat," a metaphor for learning God's teaching, God's doctrine, God's view of life. And it shall make you to desire the best of fares, to desire the best things in life. When you learn God's view of reality, it shapes your desire, and it helps you desire the things that are truly valuable in life. It says that a lot of times our own desires will lead us to a place where we are eating with pigs, whereas and that is really part of the trust of the story of the prodigal son, that our own desires often lead us that we end up eating with the pigs. But when we wake up, when enlightenment truly comes, when light shines in our hearts, we realize that true royalty is in the value system of the Father, in the Father's house. It is in the Father's house that we find true happiness, true fulfillment, and true meaning in life. A metaphors for scripture that is, should come and buy true gold, pure gold. Often we have what is in our hands that seems like gold, and we could have a horde of sycophants and ignorant people praising us that we truly have gold. But when we go to God, we buy true gold. We buy something that is timeless, something that is eternal, and something that is truly real. That is not illusional. It's not illusion. And so it says, all our glory, all the glory of men, the things we see in this world as glorious, it says they are like vapor that will fade away, that is here in the morning and in the afternoon is gone. But the glory, the values, the principles and the hierarchy of values and evaluation that comes from God's philosophy, what today I'm presenting it to you as an antidote to chaos, the crazy world out there, to the nihilistic society and culture out there, is pure and it would last forever. So, my friends, see you next week. We're going to get into something really exciting next week. Really, really exciting. And I'm going to share with you a permanent principle that is true for male female relationships, it's true for marriage, and it's true for money. A spiritual permanent principle. Please get to me with your feedback, and get to me with questions and things that you might want us to talk more on. If there are some aspects, some things I just touched on casually and you want us to talk more on that, do get to me. Get to me with your questions. Get to me. Tell me the things that are really meaningful to you in these teachings. And then also don't forget to share with others. And I really appreciate all of you. And I appreciate you all. You guys mean the world to me. And let me bless you. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh look kindly on you and give you his shalom. I bless your week. I bless your week with wonderful blessings of miracles and open doors and favor and light and light to help you to truly discover yourself in the light of the Creator, not in any other light, not in the light of men, not in the conceited lights of the world that are not really light, not in the false lights of evil spirits and demons, but in the one true light that shines so bright from heaven, the light of our benevolent Father. May you see yourself in His light, and may you no longer believe the lies about yourself, the lies that you're limited, the lies that you're a victim, the lies that that you will not amount to anything, that you're nothing. But when you see yourself in this light, you see how unlimited you are in the Creator, how powerful you are, how blessed you are, and that will become your reality, your physical reality. And in His true light, you will see the things that are truly real in this life versus the things that are not real, the things to want and the things to desire. May His blessing be upon you this week. In the name of Yeshua, our Master. See you next week, my friends. Bye for now.